The year was 1882, a time when words were currency and silence was mistaken for weakness, when women were expected to charm with conversation and men measured worth by a voice's strength. This is the story of Eleanor Mitchell, a mail-order bride, whose profound quietness became her greatest liability in the boisterous Wyoming territory, until she met the one man who understood that sometimes the most powerful languages are spoken without sound. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The stagecoach lurched violently as it hit yet another rut, jolting Eleanor Mitchell from her contemplative state. Through dust-covered windows, the settlement of Cedar Hollow emerged, a scattered collection of log buildings set against the backdrop of the Wind River Range. Nothing like the orderly streets of Providence, Rhode Island, she had left behind. Eleanor adjusted her modest grey traveling dress, her hands steady despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. She touched the silver locket at her throat, her mother's last gift before the fever took her, and drew a quiet breath. The driver's raspy voice broke through her thoughts. "End of the line, ma'am. Cedar Hollow." Gathering her worn carpet bag and the small wooden box containing her few precious belongings, Eleanor stepped down from the coach. The Wyoming air hit her lungs with startling clarity, carrying scents of sage and distant pine. Her eyes swept across the bustling main street, searching for the face that matched the tintype photograph she'd received 4 months ago. Thomas Bradford had described himself as a successful merchant seeking a wife of gentle disposition and domestic capability. Their brief correspondence had seemed promising. He hadn't minded her tendency toward brevity in letters. Eleanor had imagined he might appreciate her quiet nature after a day of business dealings. "Miss Mitchell." Eleanor turned toward the voice. A portly man in a checkered vest approached, his mustache waxed to precise points. His eyes, however, held none of the warmth she'd imagined from his letters. "Mr. Bradford?" she asked softly, offering a slight curtsy that felt oddly formal in this frontier setting. Indeed. He looked her over with the calculating gaze of a man appraising merchandise. His frown deepened with each passing second. "You're smaller than I expected." Eleanor straightened her spine. "The journey was long, sir. Perhaps I appear travel-worn." Bradford's expression shifted to confusion, then irritation. He leaned closer. "Speak up, woman. I can barely hear you." "I said—" Eleanor raised her voice slightly, though it still barely carried above the street noise. "I may appear tired from traveling." Several passers-by had slowed their pace, openly curious about the exchange. Bradford's face reddened as he noticed the attention. "Good Lord," he muttered, then spoke with exaggerated volume. "Is that as loud as you can speak?" Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I speak clearly enough, Mr. Bradford. Perhaps the street noise—" "The street noise is normal," he interrupted, his voice carrying to the growing audience. "I run the largest mercantile in Cedar Hollow. I need a wife who can greet customers, handle negotiations when I'm away, call out prices at auctions. Not some mouse who whispers like she's in church." A woman loading supplies onto a wagon nearby snickered. 2 men outside the saloon exchanged amused glances. "I assure you, I'm quite capable of—" Eleanor began, but Bradford cut her off with a dismissive wave. No, this won't do at all." He pulled at his vest, agitation evident in every movement. "I specifically advertised for a woman of suitable temperament. I assumed that meant someone who could actually communicate." "We did communicate," Eleanor said, her quiet voice steady despite the humiliation burning through her. "Through letters." "You never mentioned letters," Bradford scoffed loudly enough to draw more attention. "Any fool can write letters. I need a wife who can shout down a haggling customer, who can call the children in from the yard, who can make herself heard at town meetings." Eleanor clutched her carpet bag tighter, fighting to maintain her dignity as whispers spread through the gathering crowd. Sir, if you would allow me to explain... Explain what? That you're practically mute? Bradford's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. This is a frontier town, Miss Mitchell, not some Eastern finishing school where ladies practice whispering. Behind fans, we speak plainly and loudly here. A gangly boy who'd been sweeping the boardwalk stopped to gawk. A cluster of women outside the general store made no effort to hide their interest in the unfolding drama. I can learn to project my voice if necessary, Eleanor offered, though the thought of constantly straining to be heard made her throat tighten. Bradford shook his head emphatically. I haven't got time to teach a grown woman how to speak properly. This was clearly a mistake. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a leather pouch. Here's enough for return passage and a night's lodging. The eastbound stage leaves tomorrow afternoon. He thrust the pouch toward her. The coins inside clinked. With finality, Eleanor stared at the offered money, the full weight of her situation crashing down. She had sold everything to make this journey, surrendered her small room above the seamstress shop, bid farewell to the few acquaintances she had in Providence. There was nothing waiting for her back east, except the poorhouse. Please, Mr. Bradford, she said, hating the desperation creeping into her whisper, if you would just give me a chance, the matter is settled. He dropped the pouch at her feet when she didn't take it. The Frontier Inn is 2 blocks down. Tell Mrs. Havisham that Bradford sent you. Good day, Miss Mitchell. With that, he turned and strode away, leaving Eleanor alone in the middle of the street, surrounded by curious onlookers and the scattered coins that had spilled from the pouch. The whispers grew louder. Poor thing came all this way for nothing. Bradford likes his women loud. Everyone knows that. What did she expect, whispering like a ghost? With as much grace as she could muster, Eleanor knelt to gather the spilled coins. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed them back in the pouch. Standing, she lifted her chin and walked toward the inn, ignoring the stares and whispered comments that followed her. The Frontier Inn stood at the edge of town, a 2-story structure with peeling paint and a sagging porch. Mrs. Havisham, a stern-faced woman with steel-grey hair, took one look at Eleanor's pale face and dust-covered dress and seemed to understand the situation immediately. Bradford's rejected bride? She asked bluntly. Eleanor nodded, too emotionally exhausted to attempt speech. Rooms at the top of the stairs, last door on the right, Mrs. Havisham said, sliding a key across the scarred counter. Supper's at 6, if you're inclined to eat, though most in your position prefer to hide. The room was sparse, a narrow bed with a thin quilt, a washstand with a chipped basin, and a single window overlooking the backs of buildings. Eleanor set down her belongings and sank onto the bed, finally allowing her shoulders to slump. She removed the locket from her throat and opened it to reveal the tiny photograph inside. Her parents, on their wedding day. Her father, a librarian, and her mother, a music teacher, had understood her quiet nature. They had created a home where silence was comfortable, where communication happened through gentle gestures and knowing looks as often as through words. What now? She whispered to their faded images. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the floor as Eleanor considered her options. The money Bradford had given her would cover return passage to Providence, but to what? The seamstress had already hired her replacement. Her parents' small house had been sold to pay medical debts. She had no relatives willing to take in a spinster approaching 30. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Eleanor opened the door to find a young woman with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands. "I'm Sarah Jennings," the woman said in a voice barely louder than Eleanor's own. "I helped Mrs. Havisham in the kitchen, heard what happened with Bradford." She held out a cup of tea. "Thought you might need this." Eleanor accepted the cup gratefully. "Thank you. That's very kind." Sarah lingered in the doorway. "Don't mind what folks say about Bradford. He's all bluster and noise, thinks volume equals value." She lowered her voice further. "Between you and me, His first wife left him because she couldn't stand his shouting. Despite everything, Eleanor felt a small smile tug at her lips. I suppose I should be grateful for the narrow escape. Then, might be. Sarah glanced down the hallway, then leaned closer. There's something else you should know. Man came by the inn about an hour ago asking after you. Not Bradford, someone else. Eleanor's brow furrowed. Who? Nathan Holloway. Owns the Triple Creek Ranch about 10 miles north of town. Sarah hesitated. He's different from most folks around here. Keeps to himself mostly. Some say it's because... She stopped abruptly as heavy footsteps sounded on the stairs. Mrs. Havisham's voice called out, Sarah! Those biscuits won't make themselves! Coming, Sarah called back, then whispered quickly to Eleanor. He said he'd return before supper. Might be worth hearing what he has to say. With a sympathetic smile, she hurried away. Eleanor closed the door and returned to the window, her mind turning over this unexpected development. Why would a stranger inquire about her? What could a reclusive rancher want with a rejected mail-order bride? As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, Eleanor made a decision. She would meet this Nathan Holloway, hear what he had to say. After all, what did she have to lose? She had already been humiliated, rejected, and left with nowhere to go. Perhaps this encounter would offer some alternative to the grim futures she'd been contemplating. She washed her face in the basin, repinned her dark hair, and changed into her second-best dress, a deep blue wool that her mother had always said brought out the grey in her eyes. If she was to face another potential rejection, she would do so with what dignity she had left. As 6 o'clock approached, Eleanor descended the stairs to the inn's small dining room. Only a handful of guests occupied the scattered tables, and they paid her little attention. She chose a seat near the window where she could observe anyone approaching the inn. She didn't have long to wait. Through the wavering glass, she saw a tall figure approaching on horseback. The man dismounted, with easy grace, his movements deliberate and unhurried. As he stepped onto the porch, Eleanor noticed something unusual about the way he carried himself, an alertness in his posture, the way his eyes seemed to take in everything at once. Nathan Holloway entered the dining room, and Eleanor's first thought was that he didn't look like the other men she'd seen in Cedar Hollow. Where they were loud and rough-edged, he carried himself with quiet dignity. His clothes were simple but well-maintained, his dark hair neatly trimmed, his beard close-cropped. But it was his eyes that caught her attention. Deep brown and intensely observant, they swept the room before settling on her. He approached her, table with measured steps, and as he drew closer, Eleanor noticed something else, the slight tilt of his head, the way he watched her lips when she began to speak. "Mr. Holloway?" she asked softly. He nodded, his eyes never leaving her face, and in that moment, Eleanor understood what Sarah had been trying to tell her. Nathan Holloway was deaf. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The realization settled over Eleanor like a warm shawl. Nathan Holloway was deaf, and suddenly his interest in her made perfect sense. He gestured politely to the empty chair across from her, raising his eyebrows in question. Eleanor nodded, watching as he settled into the seat with deliberate grace. From his pocket, he withdrew a small, leather-bound notebook and a pencil. His hand moved swiftly across the page, and he turned it toward her. "Miss Mitchell, I hope you'll forgive my unconventional approach. I saw what happened with Bradford today." Eleanor felt her cheeks warm, but there was no mockery in his eyes, only understanding. She reached for the pencil he offered, writing in her neat script, "News travels fast in Cedar Hollow, it seems." The corner of his mouth lifted in what might have been a smile. He wrote, "In a town this size, a whisper carries as far as a shout, sometimes farther." The irony wasn't lost on Eleanor. She found herself relaxing slightly as he continued writing. I have a proposition that might interest you, if you're willing to hear it. Mrs. Havisham approached their table with 2 bowls of stew and a suspicious glare. Mr. Holloway, she said loudly, over-enunciating as if volume would somehow penetrate his deafness. I hope you're not bothering my guest. Nathan's eyes flicked to her lips, reading them with practiced ease. He shook his head politely, then wrote something in his notebook and showed it to the innkeeper. Whatever it said made Mrs. Havisham's stern expression soften marginally. Well then, she huffed, setting down the bowls. See that you both eat while it's hot? She bustled away, shooting curious glances over her shoulder. Nathan pushed one of the bowls toward Eleanor, then wrote, The stew here is actually quite good, despite appearances. Eleanor found herself smiling, the first genuine smile since stepping off the stagecoach. There was something comforting about this silent conversation, free from the pressure to project her voice or strain to be heard. As they ate, Nathan continued, writing, explaining his situation. I own Triple Creek Ranch, about 10 miles north. I raise horses, good ones, but I need help, and not the kind most people think. Eleanor raised her eyebrows questioningly. I have ranch hands for the heavy work, he wrote. What I need is someone who understands that communication isn't always about volume. Someone who can help me with the business side, correspondence, records, dealing with buyers who aren't comfortable with my condition. Eleanor's hand trembled slightly as she wrote, You're offering me a position. Yes. Room and board, fair wages, and respect for who you are, not who others think you should be. The offer was unexpected, practical, and somehow more honest than anything Bradford had promised in his letters. Yet Eleanor hesitated. Why me? Surely there are others more qualified. Nathan's response came after a thoughtful pause. This morning, I was in town getting supplies. I saw how you handled Bradford's rejection, with dignity despite his cruelty. I saw how you spoke softly but clearly. Most importantly, I noticed how you maintained eye contact, how your face showed what your voice didn't need to. He paused, then added, I've learned to read more than just lips. I read character. Eleanor studied his face, searching for any sign of deception or ulterior motive. She found none. His gaze was direct but not aggressive, patient but not pitying. Would you need an answer? She wrote. The eastbound stage leaves tomorrow afternoon. If you're interested, I'll be here at sunrise with a wagon. If not, I wish you safe travels. The simplicity of his offer, no pressure, no grand promises, just a straightforward proposition, appealed to Eleanor's practical nature. Still, she needed to know more. What would my duties entail exactly? Nathan's pencil moved steadily. Keeping ranch records, writing correspondence to horse buyers and breeders, helping me understand complex negotiations through written translation, and perhaps teaching my young daughter Emma, who lost her hearing to scarlet fever last year. Eleanor's breath caught. You have a daughter? She's 8, still adjusting to her new silence. Her mother died 3 years ago, thrown from a horse. His face remained composed, but Eleanor sensed the depth of loss behind those simple words. The revelation shifted something in Eleanor's perception. This wasn't just a business arrangement, it was a chance to help a child navigate a world of silence, something Eleanor understood in her own way. I'd like to think about it overnight, she wrote. Nathan nodded, closing his notebook and standing. He touched his hat brim in farewell, then paused and wrote one more message. Whatever. You decide, remember, your quietness isn't a flaw. To some of us, it's a gift. After he left, Eleanor remained at the table, her mind churning with possibilities. The other diners had departed, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the clatter of dishes from the kitchen. Sarah emerged eventually, carrying a slice of apple pie. Saw you talking with Mr. Holloway, she said, setting the pie down. Or writing, I suppose. Eleanor nodded. He offered me a position at his ranch. Sarah's eyes widened. Did he now? Well, that's something. She glanced around, then slid into Nathan's vacated chair. Can I speak plainly? Please do. Nathan Holloway's a good man, better than most around here. Lost his hearing in a mining accident when he was 20. Dynamite blast. Instead of letting it break him, he bought land with his compensation money and built one of the finest horse ranches in the territory. Eleanor absorbed this information. And his wife? Sarah's expression softened. Margaret was a spirited woman, only person I ever saw who could argue with Nathan using nothing but gestures and expressions. When she died, he withdrew even more. Then little Emma got sick. She shook her head. Town gossips say he's cursed, but I think he's just had more than his share of sorrow. Why are you telling me this? Sarah met her eyes squarely. Because you're considering saying no, and I think that would be a mistake for both of you. That night, Eleanor lay awake in the narrow bed, weighing her options. Return east to uncertain prospects and likely poverty, or venture into the unknown with a man who saw value in her silence. The choice, when stripped of fear and convention, became clear. As dawn painted the sky pink and gold, Eleanor stood on the inn's porch with her carpetbag, watching the horizon. True to his word, Nathan appeared with a wagon just as the sun crested the mountains. He drew the horses to a stop and looked at her questioningly. Eleanor stepped forward, her decision made. For the first time since arriving in Cedar Hollow, she felt no need to speak. Her presence on the porch said everything necessary. Nathan's smile was subtle but genuine. He secured her bag in the wagon bed, then offered his hand to help her onto the seat. His touch was gentle but steady, his calloused palm warm against hers. As they drove through town, Eleanor noticed curtains twitching and faces peering from windows. Let them look, she thought. Let them whisper about the quiet woman and the deaf rancher. She was done caring about their judgments. The road to Triple. Greek Ranch wound through valleys dotted with wildflowers and stands of quaking aspen. Nathan drove with relaxed confidence, occasionally pointing out landmarks, an eagle's nest high in a dead pine, a stream where wild mustangs sometimes drank, the boundary marker where his property began. After an hour's journey, they crested a rise, and Eleanor caught her first glimpse of her new home. The ranch house sat in a natural bowl surrounded by gentle hills, its log walls golden in the morning light. A large barn and several outbuildings formed a neat compound, while fenced. Pastures stretched toward the mountains. Horses grazed peacefully, their coats gleaming in the sun. But it was the small figure on the porch that captured Eleanor's attention. A girl with copper-colored braids, watching their approach with solemn intensity. Emma. Nathan must have noticed. Eleanor's gaze. He pulled a note from his pocket, already written. She's nervous about meeting you, afraid you'll be like the last governess, who shouted as if volume could cure deafness. Eleanor felt a surge of protective anger toward this child she hadn't yet met. She took the pencil and wrote, I understand being different. We'll find our own way to communicate. As they pulled up to the house, Emma stood frozen, her small hands clenched at her sides. Eleanor climbed down from the wagon without waiting for assistance and approached the child slowly, maintaining eye contact. When she was close enough, she did something that surprised both Nathan and Emma. She knelt to the girl's level and signed a simple greeting, one of the few signs she'd learned from a deaf neighbor in Providence. Emma's eyes widened. She looked at her father, then back at Eleanor, before hesitantly signing something in return. Eleanor didn't understand the specific signs, but she recognized the universal language of a child's cautious hope. Nathan watched this exchange with an expression Eleanor couldn't quite read. He signed something to Emma, who nodded and darted into the house. Then he turned to Eleanor and wrote, How did you know any signs? Mrs. Carmichael, my neighbor in Providence. She taught me a few basics before I left. I hoped they might be useful someday. Nathan studied her for a long moment, then wrote, "Welcome to Triple Creek Ranch, Miss Mitchell. I believe you'll fit in here just fine." As Eleanor followed him into the house, she felt something she hadn't experienced since her parents' deaths, the sense of coming home, not to a place but to a possibility. A chance to build something new from the quiet spaces others feared to enter. The interior of the ranch house reflected its owner's practical nature, but with touches that suggested a gentler influence. Dried wildflowers in a blue glass vase, colorful quilts draped over sturdy furniture, books lining built-in shelves. Emma reappeared carrying a slate and chalk, which she offered to Eleanor with shy formality. Eleanor accepted the slate and wrote, "Thank you, Emma. I'm happy to meet you." The girl's response was a tentative smile that transformed her serious face. She signed something rapidly to her father, who chuckled, a deep, rich sound that seemed to surprise him as much as it did Eleanor. "She wants to know if you like horses," he translated onto paper. "I've never been around them much," Eleanor admitted, "but I'd love to learn." This confession seemed to delight Emma, who grabbed Eleanor's hand and tugged her toward the window, pointing excitedly at the pastures beyond. Eleanor allowed herself to be led, feeling the last of her uncertainty melt away. Whatever challenges lay ahead at Triple Creek Ranch, she knew one thing with certainty. Here, her quietness would not be a liability, but an asset. Here, in this place of shared silence, she might finally find her voice, not in volume, but in value. The first weeks at Triple Creek Ranch passed in a rhythm Eleanor had never known. Mornings began before dawn, with the soft percussion of hoofbeats as ranch. Hands led horses to pasture. She would find Nathan already at work in his study, reviewing breeding records by lamplight, his concentration absolute until she appeared in the doorway with coffee. Their communication evolved naturally. Sometimes they used the notebook, other times a combination of gestures, expressions, and the growing vocabulary of signs Eleanor was learning from both Nathan and Emma. She discovered that Nathan had an extensive library of books on horse breeding and ranch management, many annotated with his careful handwriting. One morning, about 3 weeks into her stay, Eleanor was organizing correspondence when she noticed a pattern in the responses from potential buyers. Many seemed hesitant, their letters dancing around what appeared to be concerns about conducting business with a deaf rancher. She brought this observation to Nathan during their daily meeting. His jaw tightened as he read her notes, but he wrote, "They assume deafness equals inability. I've lost good sales because buyers would rather work with someone who can negotiate properly." Eleanor considered this, then wrote, "What if we change their perception? Your horses speak for themselves. Let me draft letters that showcase your expertise without apologizing for your deafness." Nathan studied her for a long moment before nodding slowly. That afternoon, Eleanor began crafting a new approach to their business correspondence, one that emphasized Triple Creek's reputation for excellence and Nathan's deep knowledge of bloodlines and training methods. The results were immediate. Within weeks, inquiries increased, and several previously hesitant buyers scheduled visits. Eleanor took quiet satisfaction in watching these men arrive skeptical and leave impressed, having witnessed Nathan's expertise firsthand. Emma, meanwhile, had attached herself to Eleanor like a shadow. The girl's hunger for learning matched Eleanor's joy in teaching. They established a daily routine, mornings for traditional subjects like arithmetic and reading, afternoons for what Emma called the interesting stuff, art, music theory, which Eleanor adapted for visual learning, and the ever-expanding world of sign language. One afternoon, Eleanor sat with Emma on the porch, using the slate to explain fractions through drawings of divided apples. Nathan approached from the stables. pausing to watch them work. The tenderness in his expression made Eleanor's heart flutter unexpectedly. Later he wrote, "She's different since you arrived, happier, more confident." "She was always this remarkable," Eleanor replied. "She just needed someone to see it." Their eyes met over the notebook, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of growing connection that went beyond employer and employee. As summer deepened, Eleanor's role at the ranch expanded. She accompanied Nathan to horse auctions, serving as his voice while he selected stock with unerring judgment. Her quiet presence and clear explanations earned respect from even the most traditional ranchers. One particularly hot afternoon, they attended an auction in Red Valley, a larger town 2 hours south of Cedar Hollow. Eleanor had grown accustomed to curious stares, but today's crowd seemed especially attentive. It wasn't until she overheard 2 women whispering that she understood why. That's her, the one Bradford rejected for being too quiet. Working for the deaf rancher now? Can you imagine 2 mutes together? Eleanor's cheeks burned, but before she could react, Nathan touched her elbow gently. He'd noticed the women too. With deliberate casualness, he signed something that made nearby onlookers gasp. Though they couldn't understand the words, his expression made the meaning clear. He was proud to have Eleanor at his side. The auction proceeded smoothly, with Nathan securing 2 promising yearlings. As they prepared to leave, a well-dressed man approached. Mr. Jameson, a prominent horse breeder from Denver. "Holloway," he said, then turned to Eleanor. "And you must be the famous Miss Mitchell. I've been receiving your letters." Eleanor inclined her head politely. "Mr. Jameson, your correspondence has been illuminating. I must admit, I'd been hesitant to do business with," he gestured vaguely toward Nathan, "given the communication challenges. But your letters convinced me otherwise." Nathan watched the exchange carefully, reading lips with practiced skill. Eleanor felt a surge of protective pride. "Mr. Holloway's expertise speaks for itself," she said softly but firmly. "Any communication challenges exist only in the minds of those who equate volume with value." Jameson had the grace to look slightly abashed. "Indeed, which is why I'm here to discuss a rather substantial arrangement. Might we speak privately?" What followed was one of the most significant deals in Triple Creek's history, a contract to supply horses to Jameson's extensive network of Eastern buyers. Eleanor facilitated the negotiation with growing confidence, translating complex terms into writing, while Nathan's sharp mind calculated bloodlines and breeding potential. That evening, as they drove home through the purple twilight, Nathan pulled the wagon to a stop beside a stream. He wrote, "What you did today, standing up for me, for us. Thank you." Eleanor felt warmth spread through her chest. "You don't need defending. You just need people to see what's already there. Like you did, like Emma did first. Children see truth more clearly than adults." Nathan's hand covered hers on the wagon seat, the touch sending electricity through her skin. For a long moment, they sat in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Their relationship shifted after that night, though neither spoke of it directly. Touches lingered longer than necessary. Glances held deeper meaning. Eleanor found herself looking forward to their evening conversations with an intensity that both thrilled and frightened her. The change didn't go unnoticed. Mrs. Ortiz, the ranch cook, who came 3 days a week, observed their interactions with knowing smiles. Even the ranch hands seemed to sense something blossoming between their quiet boss and the Eastern woman who'd brought new life to Triple Creek. One morning in late August, Eleanor was teaching Emma in the study when urgent hoofbeats announced an unexpected visitor. Through the window, she saw a rider approaching at full gallop, Sarah Jennings from town, her face pale with urgency. Eleanor met her at the door. "Sarah, what's wrong?" "It's Bradford," Sarah gasped, catching her breath. He's been drinking, talking ugly about you and Mr. Holloway. Says he's coming out here to set things right. Eleanor's blood ran cold. When? Now. He left right after me, but I know a shortcut. You've got maybe 20 minutes. Nathan appeared, in the doorway, instantly alert to the tension. Eleanor quickly wrote out Sarah's warning. His expression darkened as he read, but his hand remained steady as he wrote, "Take Emma to the root cellar. Stay there until I come for you." Eleanor shook her head firmly. "This concerns me too. I won't hide." Their eyes locked in a brief battle of wills. Finally, Nathan nodded once sharply and strode toward the gun cabinet. Eleanor sent Emma with Sarah to the cellar despite the girl's protests, then positioned herself on the porch. She didn't have long to wait. Bradford appeared on the road, whiskey-bowled and accompanied by 3 rough-looking men. As they approached, Eleanor recognized one as Jake Murdoch, a troublemaker who'd been banned from the Frontier Inn for harassing Sarah. "Well, well," Bradford called out as he dismounted, "if it isn't the mouse who found herself another hole to hide in." Eleanor stood her ground, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "You're trespassing, Mr. Bradford." "Can't hear you," he mocked, cupping his hand to his ear. "Guess that's why you fit in so well with the deaf-mute." Nathan emerged from the house, rifle in hand. His presence was calm but commanding. Every inch the man who'd built Triple Creek from nothing. He positioned himself slightly in front of Eleanor, protective but not overshadowing. Bradford's false bravado wavered slightly. "Got nothing to say, Holloway? Oh, right, you can't." He laughed at his own joke, though his companions seemed less amused, eyeing Nathan's steady grip on the rifle. "Mr. Holloway has already said everything necessary," Eleanor stated, her quiet voice carrying surprising authority. "This is private property. Leave now." Listen to her, trying to sound important. Bradford took a swaying step forward. "You know what they're saying in town? That you two are living in sin, that you're using your afflictions as an excuse for immorality." Eleanor felt Nathan tense beside her, but she placed a restraining hand on his arm. "What people say reveals more about them than about us. Your presence here, drunk and threatening, speaks volumes about your character." "You rejected her, Bradford," one of his companions muttered. "Let it go." "Shut up," Bradford snarled. "She made me look like a fool." "No," Eleanor said softly. "You did that yourself." The truth of her words seemed to penetrate Bradford's whiskey-fogged mind. His face contorted with rage, and he lunged forward, only to stop short as Nathan's rifle snapped to his shoulder in one fluid motion. The crack of a gunshot split the air, but it came from behind them. Sheriff Coleman sat astride his horse at the ranch entrance, his own rifle smoking. "That's enough, Bradford. You boys are done here." Eleanor hadn't even heard him approach, but she'd never been more grateful for an arrival. The sheriff's presence deflated the remaining fight from Bradford and his men. "She's the one causing trouble," Bradford protested weakly. "Funny," Coleman drawled, "seeing as you're the one on private property with 3 armed men." He jerked his head toward town. "Git, and if I hear about you bothering these folks again, you'll be cooling your heels in my jail." As Bradford and his men rode away, Sheriff Coleman dismounted. "Sarah Jennings rode to my office," he explained. "Figured there might be trouble." He tipped his hat to Eleanor. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology. Should have stepped in when Bradford first acted ugly toward you. This town's got some growing up to do." After the sheriff left, Eleanor found herself trembling with delayed reaction. Nathan's notebook appeared in her vision. "Are you all right?" She nodded, then shook her head, then surprised them both by stepping into his arms. Nathan held her carefully, as if she might break, his strength a steady anchor in the storm of emotions. When she finally stepped back, he wrote, "You were brave today." I was terrified. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it. Eleanor met his gaze, seeing in his eyes something that made her breath catch. Without thinking, she reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. Nathan's hand covered hers, pressing it against his cheek. In that moment, words, spoken or written, became unnecessary. Their lips met in a kiss that tasted of tenderness and promise, of two people who had found in each other's silence a profound understanding. When they parted, Nathan's smile held a question. Eleanor answered it by taking his hand and leading him back into the house. Their house now, in every way that mattered. The confrontation with Bradford marked a turning point, both for Eleanor's standing in Cedar Hollow and for her relationship with Nathan. News of the incident spread quickly, but rather than damaging their reputations, it seemed to shift public opinion. The image of Eleanor standing firm against a drunken bully resonated with the frontier spirit of courage and self-reliance. September arrived with golden aspens and crisp mornings. Eleanor had been at Triple Creek for nearly 4 months, and the ranch had transformed under her influence. The office was now meticulously organized, correspondence flowed smoothly, and most importantly, Nathan's business was thriving. Word had spread about the quality of Triple Creek horses and the professionalism of its operations. One morning, Eleanor was reviewing breeding records when Emma burst into the office, signing frantically. Eleanor had progressed enough in sign language to understand. Visitors were approaching, important-looking ones. Nathan appeared moments later, having seen the carriage from the stables. He wrote quickly, "The Vanderhilts, railroad money from back east. They telegraphed last week about purchasing a full stable's worth of horses." Eleanor straightened her dress and smoothed her hair. She'd handled significant negotiations before, but the Vanderhilt name carried weight even in Wyoming territory. As the ornate carriage pulled up, she took her position beside Nathan on the porch. William Vanderhilt III stepped down first, followed by his wife, an elegant woman in traveling clothes that probably cost more than Eleanor's entire wardrobe. There, expressions shifted from polite interest to poorly concealed surprise when Nathan didn't greet them verbally. "Mr. Vanderhilt," Eleanor said softly but clearly. "Mrs. Vanderhilt, welcome to Triple Creek Ranch. I'm Eleanor Mitchell, Mr. Holloway's business associate." William Vanderhilt recovered quickly. "Ah, yes, your letters were most thorough." His gaze moved between Eleanor and Nathan, clearly trying to understand the dynamic. "Mr. Holloway looks forward to showing you our finest stock," Eleanor continued, smoothly. "He has selected several horses that match the specifications you provided." What followed was a masterclass in non-verbal communication. Nathan led the tour with confident expertise, examining horses with the Vanderhilts, while Eleanor provided running commentary, translating his insights about bloodlines, temperament, and training. Her quiet voice carried just enough to be heard without straining, and her explanations were precise and knowledgeable. By the time they returned to the house for refreshments, William Vanderhilt was thoroughly impressed. "I must admit," he said, accepting a glass of lemonade from Mrs. Ortiz, "I had reservations about this arrangement. But your operation is remarkably professional." His wife, Charlotte, had been watching Emma, who was practicing her letters on a slate in the corner. "Your daughter is delightful," she said to Nathan, then looked confused when he didn't respond. "Emma lost her hearing to illness," Eleanor explained gently. "She and her father share a special bond through sign language." Charlotte's expression softened. "How wonderful that they can still communicate. In New York, such children are often institutionalized." The word sent a chill through Eleanor. She'd heard of such places, warehouses for those deemed different or difficult. The thought of vibrant, intelligent Emma locked away made her stomach turn. Nathan must have read the conversation from their lips, because his hand found Eleanor's under the table, squeezing gently. The protective gesture didn't go unnoticed by Charlotte Vanderhilt, whose eyes sparkled with sudden understanding. The business discussion continued, culminating in the largest single sale in Triple Creek's history. As the Vanderhilts prepared to leave, Charlotte took Eleanor aside. "My dear," she said quietly, "I chair several philanthropic organizations back east. We're always looking for examples of how people with differences can lead productive lives. Would you consider writing about your experiences here, both yours and Mr. Holloway's?" Eleanor hesitated. "I wouldn't presume to speak for Nathan, but you do speak for him, don't you?" Charlotte's smile was knowing. "In more ways than one, I suspect." After the Vanderhilts departed, Eleanor shared the conversation with Nathan. He considered for a long moment before writing, "Our story might help others, Emma's especially. If you're willing to write it, I'm willing to share it." That evening, after Emma was asleep, Eleanor and Nathan sat together on the porch swing, watching lightning dance along the distant mountains. Their shoulders touched, and Eleanor felt the warmth of his presence like a physical comfort. Nathan opened his notebook. "The Vanderhilts assumed we were married." Eleanor's heart skipped. "Did that bother you?" "No." "Did it bother you?" "No." The silence that followed was charged with possibility. Nathan turned to face her fully, his expression serious. He wrote carefully, "Eleanor, when you came here, I offered you a job. Now I want to offer you more. Will you marry me?" Eleanor stared at the words, her pulse racing. This wasn't the romantic proposal of novels, with flowery speeches and bended knee. It was something better, honest, direct, and perfectly suited to who they were. "Yes," she wrote, her hand shaking slightly. "Yes, Nathan." His smile transformed his face, boyish joy breaking through his usual reserve. He pulled her close, and their kiss tasted of promises and lightning-charged air. The wedding took place 3 weeks later in the ranch's main room, with Emma as flower girl and Sheriff Coleman officiating. Sarah Jennings stood as Eleanor's witness, while Nathan's foreman, Miguel Santos, supported him. The guest list was small but significant. Ranch hands, a few townspeople who'd become friends, and surprisingly, Rebecca Bradford, Thomas's first wife, who'd returned to Cedar Hollow after hearing about her ex-husband's final disgrace. "You showed this town that quiet strength beats loud bluster," Rebecca told Eleanor before the ceremony. "That's a lesson we all needed." Eleanor wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in lavender and tissue paper. Nathan was handsome, in a new black suit, his eyes never leaving Eleanor as she walked toward him. The ceremony was conducted in both spoken words and sign language, with Emma beaming as she watched her father and new mother exchange vows. That night, as Eleanor lay in Nathan's arms in their bedroom, she marveled at the journey that had brought her here, from rejection and humiliation to love and acceptance, from being deemed too quiet to finding someone who treasured her silence. The following months brought changes to Triple Creek. Eleanor's article for Charlotte Vanderhilt's Foundation was published in several Eastern newspapers, generating interest and support for deaf education. Letters arrived from across the country. Parents of deaf children seeking advice, educators wanting to learn their methods, even a few marriage proposals for Eleanor from men who'd always preferred quiet women. Nathan took particular pleasure in burning those last letters. Winter settled over the ranch with deep snow and crystalline skies. Eleanor learned to love the season's forced intimacy. Long evenings by the fire, teaching Emma to read lips, working alongside Nathan in his study. Their communication had evolved beyond notebooks and formal signs into a fluid language of gesture, expression, and touch. One February morning, Eleanor woke feeling queasy. The sensation persisted for days, accompanied by fatigue and sensitivity to smells. When Mrs. Ortiz found her retching behind the kitchen, the older woman's knowing smile confirmed Eleanor's suspicions. "How far along?" Mrs. Ortiz asked. "2 months, I think," Eleanor whispered. "Have you told him?" Eleanor shook her head. "I wanted to be sure." That evening she found Nathan in the barn, checking on a mare due to foal. The parallel wasn't lost on her as she touched his shoulder to get his attention. When he turned, she handed him a note. "We need to talk, in private." Concern creased his brow, but he followed her to the house. In their bedroom, Eleanor took his hands and placed them on her still flat stomach. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by joy so profound it took her breath away. Nathan dropped to his knees, pressing his forehead against her abdomen. When he looked up, tears glistened in his eyes. He signed something she didn't recognize, then wrote, "Thank you for everything, for being here, for loving us, for this miracle." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Eleanor's morning sickness lasted well into her second trimester. Emma appointed herself Eleanor's helper, bringing cool cloths and crackers, practicing her signs for baby and brother or sister. As Eleanor's body changed, so did the ranch's reputation. The success of their breeding program, combined with the article's impact, had made Triple Creek something of a curiosity. Visitors arrived regularly, some genuinely interested in horses or deaf education, others simply wanting to gawk at the unusual family. Eleanor handled them all with quiet grace, protecting their privacy while promoting their business. Nathan marveled at her ability to be simultaneously gentle and firm, welcoming and protective. In her 7th month, a letter arrived that changed everything. The return address was Harvard University, and the contents made Eleanor sink into the nearest chair. Nathan appeared immediately, alert to her distress. "It's from Harvard's medical school," she wrote with trembling fingers. "They want to study our family. They're researching hereditary deafness and unusual social adaptations." Nathan's expression darkened as he read the letter. The language was clinical, dehumanizing. They were specimens to be examined, not people to be understood. He took the paper and methodically tore it into pieces. "We are not experiments," he wrote firmly. "We are a family." Eleanor nodded, relieved by his reaction. But the letter had shaken her, reminding her that the outside world still saw them as oddities rather than individuals. 2 weeks before her due date, Eleanor was working in the garden when pain lanced through her abdomen. She managed to ring the bell that would summon help before another contraction doubled her over. Nathan appeared within moments, his face pale with worry. The next hours blurred together. The frantic ride to town, Dr. Hawthorne's calm efficiency, Nathan's steady presence despite his own fear. Eleanor labored through the night, drawing strength from Nathan's hand in hers, and his eyes locked on her face. As dawn broke, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that Eleanor felt more than heard. Nathan wept openly as the doctor placed the baby in his arms, and Eleanor watched her husband fall in love all over again. They named him Thomas James Holloway, Thomas for Eleanor's father, James for Nathan's. As she nursed him for the first time, Eleanor studied his perfect features, wondering if he would hear the world's music or know only its silence. Either way, he would be loved, accepted, and taught that his worth wasn't measured by what others considered normal. Emma was enchanted with her baby brother, signing gentle repeatedly as she touched his tiny fingers. Watching Nathan with both children, Eleanor felt a contentment so deep it almost hurt. This was what she'd traveled west to find, though she hadn't known it at the time. Not just a husband or a home, but a place where differences were strengths and silence spoke louder than words. The seasons turned at Triple Creek Ranch, each bringing new challenges and revelations. Young Thomas grew strong and healthy, his hearing perfect, a fact that brought both relief and a touch of bitter sweetness to Nathan, who worried his son. might struggle to understand his father's world of silence, but Thomas seemed born to bridge worlds. By 18 months, he was signing simple words alongside his first spoken ones, moving effortlessly between sound and silence. Eleanor often found Nathan watching their son with wonder, as Thomas chattered verbally to his mother, then turned to sign the same stories to his father. One autumn afternoon, Eleanor was in the study working on correspondence when 10-year-old Emma rushed in, her face alight with excitement. Her signs were rapid but clear. "Riders coming, fancy carriage, 4 horses." Eleanor moved to the window. An elegant carriage approached, unlike anything typically seen in Cedar Hollow. As it drew closer, she recognized the crest on its door, the Territorial Governor's seal. Nathan appeared at her side, having been alerted by Emma, his eyebrows raised in question. "Governor's carriage," Eleanor signed, grateful for her growing fluency. No advance notice. They met the carriage together. Thomas balanced on Eleanor's hip, while Emma stood straight and proud beside her father. Governor Martin Bellows stepped down, followed by 2 well-dressed men carrying leather portfolios. "Mr. Holloway, Mrs. Holloway," the governor greeted them warmly. "Forgive the unexpected visit. May we speak privately?" In the parlor, Eleanor served coffee while the governor explained his purpose. "I'll be direct," he said. "The territory is pushing for statehood. Part of that process involves demonstrating our progressive attitudes toward education and social welfare. Your ranch, your family, has become something of a symbol." One of his companions opened a portfolio. "We've been following Mrs. Holloway's articles about deaf education and integrated communication. The territorial legislature wants to establish a school, the Holloway Institute for Integrated Learning." Eleanor's cup rattled in its saucer. She set it down carefully before signing to Nathan, who had been reading the governor's lips with intense concentration. "The institute would serve both hearing and deaf children," the governor continued, "teaching sign language to all students, promoting understanding from the earliest ages. We'd like you both to serve on the founding board." Nathan wrote quickly. "Why us? We're ranchers, not educators." Eleanor voiced his question, adding her own thoughts. "While we're honored, there must be more qualified candidates." "Qualified, perhaps," the governor acknowledged, "but none with your practical experience or proven success. Mrs. Holloway, your quiet determination transformed not just your family, but community attitudes. Mr. Holloway, your business acumen proves that communication barriers need not limit achievement." The discussion continued for hours. By sunset, Eleanor and Nathan had agreed to consider the proposal, promising an answer within the month. After their guests departed, they sat together on the porch, watching Emma teach Thomas to catch fireflies. "It would mean spending time in the capital," Nathan wrote, "away from the ranch. We could hire additional help," Eleanor responded. "Miguel could manage operations when we're away." Nathan studied their children, his expression thoughtful. "This could change things for Emma, for others like her, and for hearing children too," Eleanor added. "Teaching them early that difference doesn't mean less." The decision wasn't easy. Triple Creek had become more than their livelihood. It was their sanctuary, but the opportunity to create lasting change proved impossible to refuse. They accepted positions on the Institute's board with the understanding that their primary residence would remain the ranch. The next 2 years brought a whirlwind of activity. Eleanor found herself speaking, quietly but firmly, before legislative committees, sharing their story and advocating for inclusive education. Nathan's presence beside her spoke volumes, his dignity and intelligence challenging every stereotype. About deafness, the Holloway Institute opened its doors in September 1886, with Emma among its first students. The school occupied a beautiful building in Cheyenne, with large windows and spacious grounds. Eleanor and Nathan attended the opening ceremony, where Governor Bellows credited them with inspiring a new vision of education in Wyoming Territory. During the reception, Eleanor noticed a familiar figure hovering at the edge of the crowd, Thomas Bradford, considerably aged and humbled. He approached hesitantly. "Mrs. Holloway," he said, his former bluster entirely absent, "I owe you an apology." "1,000 apologies." Eleanor regarded him calmly. "What brings you here, Mr. Bradford?" "My nephew." He gestured toward a young boy talking animatedly with Emma in sign language. "Born deaf. His parents were told to institutionalize him, but I remembered you. What you said about value not being measured in volume." The irony wasn't lost on Eleanor. "And now he's enrolled here thanks to the institute you helped create." Bradford's voice cracked. "I was a fool, Mrs. Holloway. My prejudice nearly cost me the joy of knowing this remarkable child." Nathan had been watching the exchange. When Eleanor translated, he wrote, "Growth requires admitting mistakes. Thank you for sharing your nephew's story." The simple grace of Nathan's response clearly moved Bradford. "I've tried to make amends," he said. "Started a fund for families who can't afford the school's tuition. It's the least I could do." As Bradford walked away, Eleanor felt Nathan's hand on her shoulder. She turned to find him smiling, a mixture of satisfaction and compassion in his eyes. They had built something larger than themselves, a legacy of understanding that was already changing lives. Back at Triple Creek, life settled into a new rhythm. They divided their time between the ranch and the institute, with Eleanor often handling public relations, while Nathan focused on practical operations. Emma flourished at school, her natural leadership emerging as she helped newer students adapt. Thomas, now 3, had become the ranch's unofficial ambassador. His ability to move seamlessly between spoken and signed communication charmed visitors and challenged preconceptions. When a newspaper reporter asked if it was difficult raising a hearing child in a silent household, Thomas himself answered, "My house isn't silent. It's full of languages." The quote became something of a motto for the institute, printed on letterheads and carved above the main entrance. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Nathan surprised Eleanor with a gift that left her speechless, literally, for once. He led her to the empty field behind their house, where construction workers were laying a foundation. "What is this?" she signed, bewildered. Nathan's smile was mysterious as he handed her architectural drawings. The plans showed a beautiful music room, soundproofed, with spaces for both traditional instruments and visual music education tools. "For you," he wrote, "and for Thomas, and for any other children who come along. Music shouldn't be foreign in our home just because I can't hear it." Eleanor threw her arms around him, tears streaming down her face. The gesture represented everything she loved about this man, his generosity, his understanding that her world and his could coexist beautifully. The music room became the heart of their home. Eleanor taught Thomas piano, while Emma created visual compositions using colored lights and shapes. Nathan would sit quietly, feeling the vibrations through the floorboards, watching his family's joy with deep contentment. That winter brought unexpected news. Eleanor was pregnant again. At 37, she hadn't thought more children were possible. The pregnancy was difficult, requiring bed rest for the final months. Nathan hovered anxiously, his protective instincts in overdrive. Sarah Holloway was born during a spring thunderstorm. Her arrival, as dramatic as her personality, would prove to be. Unlike her brother, Sarah was born deaf, a fact confirmed when she slept peacefully through Thomas's enthusiastic piano practice. If Nathan had worried about having a deaf child, those fears evaporated the moment he held his daughter. He signed "beautiful" over and over, tears of joy replacing any hint of concern. Eleanor watched her husband with their newest child and felt a profound sense of rightness. Their family wasn't typical by any measure. a formerly rejected mail order. Bride, a deaf rancher, a deaf daughter from his first marriage, a hearing son, and now a deaf baby girl. But their differences had become their strength. As Sarah grew, the dynamics of their household shifted again. Thomas appointed himself his sister's protector and interpreter, while Emma delighted in having a deaf sibling who would understand her world completely. The ranch echoed with an extraordinary mixture of sounds and silence. Thomas's chatter, Eleanor's quiet directions, the visual language of hands moving through air. The Holloway Institute continued to thrive, its revolutionary approach attracting attention from educators across the country. Eleanor found herself corresponding with schools from Boston to San Francisco, sharing their methods and philosophy. Nathan's business expertise helped establish satellite programs in other territories, spreading their vision of integrated education. One summer evening, as Eleanor sat on the porch watching her children play, Emma showing Sarah how to sign horse, Thomas translating, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. That desperate moment at the stagecoach station seemed a lifetime ago. Nathan joined her, sliding a note across the swing. "Regrets?" She laughed softly, taking his hand. "Only that I didn't find you sooner." "You found me exactly when you were meant to," he wrote, "when we were both ready to see beyond the obvious." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Eleanor realized the truth in his words. Her quietness, once deemed a fatal flaw, had led her to a man who valued silence. His deafness, considered by many to be a limitation, had created a family where communication transcended sound. Together, they had built something remarkable, not just a successful ranch or a groundbreaking institute, but a living testament to the power of accepting difference and finding strength in what others saw as weakness. Their love story, written in the spaces between words, continued to unfold in ways neither could have imagined that first day in Cedar Hollow. The years flowed like the creek that gave Triple Creek Ranch its name, each season bringing new growth and unexpected challenges. By 1890, Wyoming had achieved statehood, and the Holloway family had become prominent figures in the new state's progressive movement. Sarah, now 3, was a whirlwind of energy and determination. Unlike Emma's gentle nature, Sarah approached her deafness with fierce independence, often rejecting help even when she needed it. Eleanor recognized her own quiet stubbornness in her youngest daughter, though Sarah's version was far from quiet. One crisp October morning, Eleanor was preparing for a meeting with state education officials when she noticed Sarah attempting to climb the corral fence. Before she could intervene, Nathan appeared, signing firmly to his daughter. Sarah's lower lip jutted out defiantly, but she climbed down, signing something that made Nathan chuckle. "What did she say?" Eleanor asked, joining them. "That the horses understand her better than we do," Nathan signed back, his eyes twinkling. She might be right. Their family had developed its own unique communication style, a fluid blend of ASL, home signs, spoken words, and intuitive understanding. Visitors often marveled at how smoothly information flowed between them, regardless of who could hear or speak. The afternoon brought surprising news. A telegram arrived from Washington, D.C., addressed to both Eleanor and Nathan. The newly formed National Association for Deaf Education wanted them to speak, or in Nathan's case, present, at their inaugural conference. "They want our story," Eleanor signed to Nathan after reading it. "All of it, from the beginning." Nathan considered this, then wrote, "Perhaps it's time. Others might find hope in knowing how rejection led to acceptance." The conference was scheduled for spring in Philadelphia. Eleanor felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation at returning east. So much had changed since she'd boarded that westbound stagecoach 8 years ago. They decided to make it a family journey. Emma, now 16 and accomplished in both academic studies and horsemanship, would graduate from the Holloway Institute that spring. Thomas, at 7, was eager to see the places from his mother's stories. Even little Sarah would make the trip, though Eleanor worried about managing her energetic daughter on such a long journey. As winter melted into spring, preparations intensified. Eleanor worked on her presentation, struggling to condense their story into something that would inspire rather than simply entertain. Nathan reviewed business arrangements, ensuring the ranch would run smoothly in their absence. The night before their departure, Eleanor found Nathan in his study, looking through a familiar leather portfolio, his artwork from their early days together. "Nervous?" she signed. He nodded, then wrote, "Not about the conference, about returning to the world that rejected us both." Eleanor sat beside him, taking his hand. "We return as ourselves, not as who they wanted us to be." The train journey east was an adventure in itself. Thomas peppered everyone with questions about the changing landscape, while Sarah charmed fellow passengers with her expressive signing, even those who couldn't understand her. Emma spent hours reading, occasionally looking up to sign observations to her father. Philadelphia overwhelmed them initially. The noise, the crowds, the tall buildings, so different from Wyoming's open spaces. But Eleanor felt a strange sense of homecoming too. This was the world she'd known, now viewed through eyes changed by frontier life. The conference venue was grand, a former theater converted into a meeting hall. As they entered, Eleanor noticed the stares, not the cruel curiosity of their early days in Cedar Hollow, but genuine interest and admiration. Their reputation had preceded them. The first day included presentations from educators and medical professionals. Eleanor listened carefully, noting how clinical and detached many speakers were. They talked about deaf individuals as subjects to be studied rather than people to be understood. When their turn came the following morning, Eleanor approached the podium with Nathan beside her. The hall fell silent as they took their places. A quietly dignified woman and a tall, composed man whose presence commanded attention without a word. 8 years ago, Eleanor began, her soft voice somehow filling the space. I stepped off a stagecoach in Cedar Hollow, Wyoming, expecting to marry a man who wanted a suitable wife. Instead, I was rejected for being too quiet. She paused, letting the irony sink in. That rejection became my greatest blessing, leading me to Nathan Holloway, a man who understood that communication isn't about volume, it's about connection. As Eleanor spoke, Nathan illustrated their story through a series of drawings projected onto a screen, images he'd created specifically for this presentation. The audience watched, transfixed, as their journey unfolded. The humiliation at the stagecoach, their first written conversation at the inn, Emma's gradual trust, the confrontation with Bradford, the building of their family, and the institute. We, who don't see deafness as a deficiency to be fixed, Eleanor continued. We see it as a different way of experiencing the world, one that enriches rather than diminishes. Nathan then took center stage, his presence commanding even in silence. Through Eleanor's voice and his signs, he shared his perspective. The isolation of acquired deafness, the struggle to maintain dignity in a hearing world, the joy of finding someone who saw his worth beyond his perceived limitations. The presentation concluded with Emma, Thomas, and Sarah joining them on stage. Emma signed a poem she'd written about growing up in a house where love speaks all languages. Thomas demonstrated how naturally he moved between speaking and signing. Sarah, irrepressible as ever, signed enthusiastically about her horse's back, making the audience laugh with her animated expressions. The standing ovation lasted several minutes. Afterward, they were surrounded by attendees asking questions, sharing stories, seeking advice. Eleanor noticed tears in many eyes, parents of deaf children, educators frustrated with traditional methods, deaf adults who'd never seen their experience reflected so positively. Among the crowd, Eleanor spotted a familiar face, Charlotte Vanderhilt, looking older but still elegant. "My dear," Charlotte embraced her warmly. "What you've built goes far beyond what I imagined when I first asked you to write about your experiences." That evening, at the conference gala, Eleanor and Nathan were presented with an award for revolutionary contributions to deaf education. As Nathan held the crystal trophy, his eyes met Eleanor's across the crowded room. No words or signs were needed. Their shared smile said everything. The conference changed things. Invitations poured in from schools and organizations across the country. Publishers wanted Eleanor to write a book. Medical researchers sought Nathan's input on deaf-friendly practices. The Holloway Institute received funding offers from multiple sources, but amidst the acclaim, Eleanor sensed Nathan's growing discomfort with their public role. One night in their hotel room, he wrote, "I'm a rancher, not a celebrity. The horses. Don't care if I'm famous." "What do you want to do?" Eleanor asked. "Go home. Continue our work, but from Triple Creek. Let others carry the message forward." Eleanor felt relief at his words. The spotlight, while gratifying, wasn't where either of them truly belonged. They were builders, not performers. They returned to Wyoming to find the ranch thriving under Miguel's care. The familiar routine, dawn feedings, training sessions, evening accounts, felt like slipping into comfortable clothes after wearing formal attire too long, but they couldn't entirely escape. Their newfound prominence. Letters arrived daily from parents, educators, and deaf individuals seeking guidance. Eleanor spent mornings responding, while Nathan focused on expanding their breeding program to fund scholarships at the Institute. Emma graduated with honors and surprised everyone by announcing her intention to study veterinary medicine, a field just beginning to open to women. "Animals don't care if I'm deaf," she signed, with a confidence that reminded Eleanor of Nathan. Thomas showed an aptitude for languages, both spoken and signed. By age 8, he was translating complex concepts. Between English, ASL, and the family's unique hybrid communication system, his teachers predicted a future in diplomacy or education. Sarah remained their wild child, more at home in the stables than the classroom. But her connection with horses was extraordinary. Nathan often said she communicated with them in ways that transcended human understanding of language. On a quiet evening in late summer, Eleanor and Nathan sat on their porch swing, watching their children. Emma was helping Thomas with his studies, while Sarah played with barn kittens, signing to them as if they could understand. "Did you ever imagine this?" Eleanor signed. "When you first saw me at the inn?" Nathan smiled, shaking his head. "I saw a woman who understood dignity in silence. Everything else grew from that, and I saw a man who valued what others dismissed. Their hands found each other naturally, fingers intertwining in the fading light. The ranch stretched before them, not just land and buildings, but a testament to what could be built when people looked beyond surface differences to find deeper connections." In the distance, a train whistle sounded, the railroad that had brought Eleanor west, now carrying their message east through the Institute's graduates and their own example. They had created more than a family or a business. They had sparked a movement that would continue long after they were gone. As stars emerged in the darkening sky, Eleanor reflected on the profound truth that her greatest rejection had led to her greatest acceptance. In finding Nathan, she had found not just love but purpose. Together, they had proven that the most powerful voices aren't always the loudest, and the most meaningful conversations don't always require sound. The evening breeze carried the scent of sage and the distant sound of horses nickering in their stalls. Eleanor leaned against Nathan's shoulder, feeling his steady heartbeat, and knew that she was exactly where she belonged, in the quiet center of a love that spoke volumes without words. The year 1895 brought changes that would test the Holloway family's resilience in ways they hadn't anticipated. Emma had left for veterinary school in Colorado, the first deaf woman to be admitted to the program. Her departure created a quieter space at Triple Creek, though her weekly letters kept the family connected to her adventures. One stormy April morning, Eleanor was teaching Sarah her lessons when Thomas burst into the schoolroom, his face pale with worry. "Mother, something's wrong with Father. He's in the barn, holding his head." Eleanor rushed to the stables, finding Nathan leaning against a stall door, his usually steady hands trembling. When he looked up, she saw something that chilled her blood, confusion in his eyes, as if he didn't recognize her for a moment. Dr. Morrison's diagnosis was grim. Nathan had suffered what the doctor called a brain episode, likely a mild stroke. While his physical recovery was promising, the event had affected his vision, creating blind spots that made reading lips and signing more challenging. "Will it improve?" Eleanor asked the doctor privately. "Perhaps, perhaps not. The brain is mysterious territory, Mrs. Holloway." For a man who had built his world around visual communication, the impairment was devastating. Nathan withdrew into himself, frustrated by his new limitations. Eleanor watched helplessly as her strong, confident husband struggled with tasks that had once been effortless. Sarah, now 8, approached the situation with characteristic directness. One morning, Eleanor found her daughter sitting with Nathan, placing his hands on her face as she signed, teaching him to feel the movements he could no longer clearly see. "Papa needs new ways," Sarah signed to Eleanor later. "Like when Emma taught me to feel horse breathing, to know if they're scared." The child's insight sparked an idea. Eleanor began researching tactile signing, a method where signs were felt rather than seen. It was primarily used with deaf-blind individuals, but perhaps it could help Nathan navigate his new reality. The family adapted, as they always had. Thomas became Nathan's eyes for business matters, reading correspondence aloud while Eleanor translated. Sarah appointed herself Nathan's guide around the ranch, her small hand confidently leading her father between buildings. But the greatest challenge came from an unexpected source. The Holloway Institute's board, concerned about Nathan's condition, suggested he step down from his leadership role. "It's not about capability," the board chairman explained during a tense meeting. "It's about perception. We're fighting for legitimacy in deaf education. Having a leader who is both deaf and visually impaired might what?" Eleanor interrupted, her quiet voice carrying steel. "Might show that disabled individuals can overcome multiple challenges, might demonstrate the adaptability we're trying to teach." The board backed down, but the incident left scars. Nathan's confidence, already shaken, took another blow. He began avoiding public appearances, letting Eleanor handle most institute business. Summer brought a surprise visitor, Margaret Patterson, a teacher from the Perkins School for the Blind in Boston. She had heard about Nathan's condition through educational circles and came offering expertise in deaf-blind communication. "Mr. Holloway," she said during their first meeting, "Helen Keller is proving that neither deafness nor blindness need limit one's contribution to society. Your situation is different, but the principle remains. Under Margaret's guidance, the family learned new communication techniques. Nathan's hands became more sensitive, reading signs through touch. Eleanor developed a system of taps and pressures for quick communications. Even the ranch hands adapted, learning to approach Nathan from specific angles where his vision remained clear. The true turning point came in autumn. A group of newly deafened adults, workers injured in a mining accident, arrived at the institute. Seeking help, they were angry, frightened men who saw their futures as over. Nathan insisted on meeting them, despite his own struggles. Through Eleanor's voice and his limited signing, he shared his story, not just of deafness, but of adapting to additional disability. His honesty about fear and frustration, combined with visible evidence of overcoming challenges, reached the men in ways no other counselor had. You showed them possibility, Eleanor signed that evening. Using the tactile method they'd developed, I showed them reality, Nathan responded, his hands sure in hers. That life changes, but doesn't end. The experience revitalized Nathan's commitment to the Institute. He began working with Margaret to develop programs for multiple disabilities, expanding their mission beyond deaf education. That winter, a letter arrived that would change their course again. The territorial government of Alaska was establishing schools for native populations and wanted the Holloways' expertise in bridging cultural and communication barriers. "It's so far," Eleanor signed, watching Nathan's face carefully. "Far from what?" he asked. "From limitations, from people who see only what we can't do." The decision wasn't easy. Triple Creek was their home, their children's heritage, but the opportunity to apply their methods in a completely different context, to help communities facing their own communication challenges, proved irresistible. They spent months preparing. Emma returned from veterinary school to help transition the ranch operations. Thomas, now 13 and remarkably mature, took on additional responsibilities. Sarah alternated between excitement about the adventure and distress at leaving her beloved horses. The journey north was arduous. They traveled by train to Seattle, then by steamship up the coast. The landscape grew wilder, more primitive, reminding Eleanor of her first glimpse of Wyoming territory years ago. In Juneau, they were met by Reverend Sheldon Jackson, the education superintendent who had recruited them. "The native communities here face unique challenges," he explained. "Different languages, different concepts of deafness and disability. We need your approach, seeing difference as diversity, not deficiency." Their first assignment was establishing a school in a Tlingit village where several children had been born deaf due to a measles epidemic. The cultural barriers were immense. Traditional beliefs about disability clashed with educational goals. The village elders were skeptical of outsiders, particularly ones who couldn't hear, but Eleanor and Nathan had learned patience in Wyoming. They spent weeks observing, learning customs, building trust. Nathan's dignified bearing and obvious competence despite his disabilities impressed the elders. Eleanor's quiet persistence won over the mothers. Sarah proved instrumental in connecting with the children. Her uninhibited approach to communication, using gesture, expression, and improvised signs, transcended cultural barriers. She played with the village children, deaf and hearing alike, creating games that incorporated both Tlingit gestures and ASL signs. "Children understand," Sarah signed to her parents one evening. "They don't care about different. They care about fun." Slowly, the school took shape. They trained local teachers, adapting their methods to incorporate Tlingit cultural elements. Nathan worked with the village craftsmen to create visual aids using traditional artistic styles. Eleanor developed curriculum that respected indigenous knowledge while introducing new concepts. The work was challenging but rewarding. Letters from Emma, now practicing veterinary medicine in Denver, and Thomas, excelling at a boarding school in Seattle, kept them connected to their older children. Sarah thrived in the new environment, becoming fluently multilingual in English, ASL, and Tlingit signs. After a year in Alaska, they received news that would test their resolve again. The Holloway Institute in Wyoming was struggling. Without Nathan's direct leadership and Eleanor's diplomatic skills, enrollment had dropped. The board begged them to return. The family gathered in their small cabin to discuss the situation. Outside, the northern lights painted the sky in ethereal colors. "We built something important here," Nathan signed, his movements visible in the lamplight. "And we built something important there," Eleanor responded. "Which matters more?" It was Thomas, visiting during school break, who offered a solution. "Why choose? We've proven that good ideas can spread. Train others to continue the work here, then return to strengthen what we started in Wyoming." The wisdom of youth prevailed. They spent 6 more months in Alaska, establishing sustainable leadership for the northern schools. The experience had changed them all, broadening their understanding of communication, culture, and community. When they finally returned to Triple Creek in the spring of 1898, they found the ranch unchanged, but somehow smaller than memory. The Wyoming sky seemed less vast after Alaska's grandeur, yet more precious for its familiarity. The Institute welcomed them back with celebration. Under their renewed leadership, it soon regained its prominence. But now, its mission had expanded, incorporating lessons learned in the North about cultural sensitivity and adaptive communication. Nathan's vision had stabilized, though the blind spots remained. He moved through the world with careful grace, his other senses heightened by necessity. Eleanor often caught him smiling at sounds she barely noticed, the particular rhythm of each child's footsteps, the subtle variations in horse whinnies. One evening, as they sat on their porch, watching sunset paint the mountains, Nathan took Eleanor's hand and traced words in her palm, a communication method they'd learned in Alaska. "No regrets?" he asked. Eleanor turned to face him fully, studying the lines that years and challenges had etched on his face. She thought of that terrified young woman rejected at the stagecoach station, of the journey that had led her from humiliation to purpose. "Only gratitude," she signed back, knowing he would feel the movement even if he couldn't see all of it. For every closed door that led to open windows. Their story had become larger than themselves, a testament to resilience, adaptation, and the power of seeing ability where others saw only limitation. From the windswept plains of Wyoming to the forests of Alaska, they had built bridges of understanding that would outlast them both. As darkness settled over Triple Creek Ranch, the lights of the Institute glowed in the distance, a beacon of hope for all who sought to communicate across the boundaries of silence and sound. The new century dawned with Triple Creek Ranch at the heart of a quiet revolution. The Holloway Institute had inspired similar schools across 12 states, each adapting their methods to local needs. Eleanor and Nathan, now in their 50s, had become elder statesmen of the integrated education movement. Spring of 1900 brought a gathering that would have seemed impossible 20 years earlier. The ranch hosted the first national conference on integrated communication, drawing educators, doctors, and families from across the country. The main house overflowed with guests, while additional visitors camped in military-style tents across the property. Emma arrived from Denver with her husband, Dr. James Chen, a hearing physician who had learned ASL to court her. Their 2-year-old daughter, Lucy, toddled between languages as naturally as breathing. Thomas came from Harvard, where he was completing his doctorate in linguistics, specializing in the relationship between signed and spoken languages. Sarah, now 13 and as spirited as ever, had refused to leave her horses for schooling elsewhere, instead taking correspondence courses while developing Triple Creek's equine therapy program for disabled children. On the conference's opening morning, Eleanor stood before the assembled crowd in the Institute's auditorium. Nathan sat beside her, his presence as commanding as ever, despite the silver in his hair and the careful way he now moved. 22 years ago, Eleanor began, her voice still soft but carrying clearly, I was rejected for being too quiet. That rejection led me to a man who understood that true communication transcends volume. Today, we gather to celebrate not just our story, but the thousands of stories that have grown from that first seed of understanding. The conference featured presentations from Institute graduates now teaching across the country, parents sharing. Success stories and researchers presenting evidence that integrated education benefited both deaf and hearing children. But the most powerful moment came during an unscheduled session. Thomas Bradford, now elderly and frail, asked to speak. The man who had once rejected Eleanor for her quietness stood before the assembly, his nephew, now a successful attorney, signing. Beside him, "I represent the old way of thinking," Bradford said, his voice wavering. "The belief that difference equals deficiency. My prejudice nearly cost me the joy of knowing my nephew, and did cost me the respect of this community. I speak today to say I was wrong, profoundly, destructively wrong. The Holloways showed us a better way." His apology, decades in the making, moved many to tears. Eleanor felt Nathan's hand find hers, squeezing gently. They had long ago forgiven Bradford, but his public acknowledgement marked a symbolic end to the attitudes that had once defined deaf education. As the conference concluded, the family gathered on the porch for a private moment. 4 generations of Holloways, from Nathan and Eleanor to baby Lucy, represented the living legacy of their work. "What happens now?" Sarah signed, always direct. Nathan smiled, his hands moving with practiced grace despite his vision impairment. "Now we trust others to carry it forward. Our part was to begin. Their part is to continue." The following years brought both joy and sorrow. Emma's veterinary practice specialized in working animals for disabled individuals. She developed a program training assistance dogs for deaf children, combining her medical knowledge with the communication principles she'd learned at home. Thomas published groundbreaking research on bilingual brain development in children raised with both signed and spoken language. His work challenged the prevailing medical opinion that sign language hindered speech development, proving instead that it enhanced overall language acquisition. Sarah shocked everyone by eloping with a Basque shepherd who communicated primarily through whistles, a language she learned with characteristic determination. They established a therapeutic riding center at Triple Creek, where children with various disabilities found confidence and joy through horsemanship. Sarah's unconventional approach to communication, blending ASL, whistles, and horse training, signals, proved remarkably effective with children who struggled with traditional methods. In 1905, Eleanor published her memoir, The Eloquence of Silence, which became required reading in education programs nationwide. The book's dedication, a read to Nathan who taught me that the heart speaks loudest when the voice is still. The memoir detailed not just their personal journey, but the evolution of their educational philosophy and the countless lives they'd touched. Critics praised its quiet wisdom and revolutionary simplicity, noting how Eleanor's gentle prose carried profound implications for social change. Nathan's health declined gradually. The stroke effects worsened, and by 1910 he relied heavily on tactile signing. Yet his mind remained sharp, his dignity undiminished. He continued breeding horses until the very end, his hands reading their musculature and movement with uncanny sensitivity. Ranch hands often found him in the stables before dawn, running his hands along a horse's legs, detecting subtle changes in muscle tone that even the veterinarian might miss. His final project was breeding a line of exceptionally calm horses specifically for therapeutic riding programs. These Holloway horses became renowned across the West for their gentle temperaments and intuitive responses to riders with disabilities. Even as his own physical capabilities diminished, Nathan took pride in creating tools that would enhance others' abilities. He passed peacefully in the spring of 1912, surrounded by family. His last communication to Eleanor was characteristic: no tears, only gratitude. The funeral drew mourners from across the nation, educators, ranchers, politicians, and ordinary citizens whose lives had been transformed by his quiet revolution. The service was conducted in both spoken English and ASL, with Sarah's horses forming an honor guard along the path to the family cemetery. Eleanor lived another 8 years, long enough to see women gain the right to vote, a movement she'd quietly supported through institute connections. She spent her final years documenting their methods, corresponding with educators worldwide, and enjoying her growing collection of grandchildren, all of whom moved effortlessly between spoken and signed communication. She established the Holloway Foundation, ensuring the Institute's financial stability and funding scholarships for deaf students nationwide. Her correspondence during these years, preserved in the Institute's archives, reveals a woman at peace with her life's work, yet still pushing boundaries. She advocated for integrated education at the university level, supported early efforts in deaf civil rights, and mentored a new generation of educators. When Eleanor died in 1920, the funeral drew even larger crowds than Nathan's. Former students, colleagues, competitors, turned allies, and ordinary citizens whose lives had been touched by the Holloway's work filled the ranch. The eulogy was delivered by Margaret Patterson, the teacher who had helped Nathan adapt to his vision loss. She spoke of Eleanor's revolutionary quietness and how it had shouted down the walls of prejudice. The Holloway Institute continued to evolve under Emma's leadership. By the 1930s, it had expanded to include programs for multiple disabilities, foreign language immersion, and teacher training. The ranch remained in family hands, with Sarah's children raising both horses and hope for future generations. During World War II, the Institute adapted its methods to help soldiers who had lost hearing in combat, expanding its impact beyond childhood education. In 1950, on the Institute's 60th anniversary, Emma, now silver-haired but still vibrant, unveiled a statue in the courtyard. The bronze sculpture depicted Eleanor and Nathan as they'd been that first day at the inn. Two people separated by silence but connected by understanding, their hands poised to begin the conversation that would change countless lives. The inscription read, Eleanor and Nathan Holloway, 1860-1920, 1858-1912. They found in quiet what others missed in noise, the universal language of respect. Today, the Holloway method is taught in schools worldwide. The ranch houses a museum documenting their story, while the Institute continues its mission of integrated education. Visitors often pause at Eleanor's favorite spot on the porch, where a small plaque bears her most famous quote, "I was rejected for being too quiet, only to discover that silence speaks volumes when hearts are willing to listen." The museum features original artifacts, Eleanor's first notebook from those early conversations with Nathan, his portfolio of drawings, Emma's childhood compositions, and Sarah's therapy saddles. But the most popular exhibit is the recreation of that first meeting at the Frontier Inn, with life-sized figures of Eleanor and Nathan, their hands poised with notebook and pencil, beginning the conversation that would change deaf education forever. In 2000, the centennial celebration brought Holloway descendants from around the world. Lucy's granddaughter, now president of the Institute, announced a new initiative, the Global Holloway Network, using internet technology to connect deaf and hearing students across continents. The program, she explained, embodied Eleanor and Nathan's original vision, building bridges across all forms of silence. The woman once deemed too quiet had created an echo that would resonate through generations, proving that the most powerful messages often come in whispers, and the most eloquent statements are sometimes made in perfect silence. As the sun sets over Triple Creek Ranch each evening, casting long shadows across the land where this remarkable story unfolded, one can almost imagine Eleanor and Nathan sitting together on their porch swing, hands intertwined, sharing the comfortable silence of two souls who found in each other's quietude the loudest declaration of love. In the end, Eleanor Mitchell Holloway's journey from rejected mail-order bride to educational pioneer proved that sometimes our greatest weaknesses become our most profound strengths. Her partnership with Nathan demonstrated that true communication requires no sound, only understanding, patience, and the courage to see beyond conventional limitations. Their legacy lives on in every classroom where children sign and speak. Together, in every family that embraces difference as a gift, and in every quiet voice that finds the strength to be heard. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass. These up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.